Well, welcome everybody. This is the beginning of the school year. We're very pleased this morning to have a good friend of mine, Jane Roach, who's here to talk to us about transition. This is a very important topic, and she got up a little bit early out in the beautiful Minnesota, and is going to be giving us, I think, a very interesting talk. She wrote a wonderful chapter for a book I just edited on adolescents and adults with autism, and I think it's going to be a real treat. So, Jane, you're up.
Much thanks, Fred. Thanks everybody for getting up a little later than I did, but you're here anyway. So just want to give a shout out to Fred. Thank him for believing in me and supporting me on this amazing journey that I've had as a speech language pathologist. To have somebody believe in you at the level that Fred has means so much. So I'm going to try to make him proud as we move through these slides. As he mentioned, my name's Dr. Jane Roach. I'm an associate professor at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. And I'll give you a little bit of my background, but I really want to focus on the issues at hand because we've got some work to do in this area. So, the outline there, I think somebody needs to mute.
Deb, you can mute everybody but her.
Okay, let me see.
Colin, yeah. Colin, your supporter. Deb's subbing for Eileen, who's our usual person who knows us.
Show me how to mute everyone.
But the speaker. The speaker can stay speaking.
Yeah.
I'll just keep going here, and
yeah,
I'll just
go.
If anybody hasn't muted, if they would, that'd be great, just because it gives me crazy feedback. So thank you for that. So my background wise, in terms of my street credibility, which my daughter calls street cred, right, in the paradigm. I'm a speech pathologist. I've been one for about 24 years, coming up on 24 years. And initially did not think I would be interested in working with individuals on the autism spectrum, but it's funny how life kind of points you in that direction. So I'm excited to be talking about some of the things that I've learned over the course of time, just in working with individuals. Other parts of the talk today, I'm going to go over just a little history, how transition has come about in the last 40, 50 years for persons on the spectrum, characteristics, challenges, case studies, research, talk about some of the success stories of some of the folks I've worked with, and then give some insight into some current support services and also some future directions. One of the things that really kind of piqued my interest in this talking and having this opportunity today was speaking with a mom whose son that I knew very well, had worked with before. And her son was 13 years of age when COVID hit. And what I kept hearing from her was how abrupt that transition was and what that did to her son in terms of not being able to go to school. And I thought in my head, in the back of my head, I was like, I wonder how this is going to impact not only this individual now, but in the future. So we did this study with a couple of colleagues of mine, and what we found was that there are about 4 themes that came about, and those 4 themes are going to carry us through this talk today. Adjustments to changes. We know that that's a challenge, right? Routines and roles, instruction, and also social interactions, but really the importance of coming together. With this research study, and it was just basically a case study, one of the things that really, as I said, piqued my interest was speaking about the transition from online learning to from face-to-face to online learning. At that time, I, like the rest of us, was just trying to figure out what next steps were. So this study happened, and then Fred reached out to me to say, hey, how about a book chapter? And how about we talk about transitioning? And I thought, what a wonderful thing for me when life kind of comes together like that for you. So just giving you a little bit of real-time interest in what I've been doing in the last 3 or 4 years. So I want to talk a little bit about background, understanding the history of where transitioning has come from in terms of moving individuals, high school students, graduating. Where do they go next? What do we do next, right? So what do we know? We know basically what autism is. We know it's had a lot of names, right? Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, persons on the spectrum. Current term seems to be ASD. That might change, not really sure, right? About 1 in 54 children. We know that now. I believe when I started back almost, quarter century ago, there were, I believe it was 164. So we know that the incidence and also the prevalence has been increasing, and that leaves us with some challenges, but also some opportunities. So I'm going to talk now about where we were, right? So one of the things that, from a background standpoint, before the 1970s, students with autism and other disabilities often didn't receive appropriate education and were excluded from mainstream schools. The Education for All Handicapped Children, or the EHA Act of 1975, was a significant milestone. And I apologize for those of you who already know this, but I think a good refresher is in order, just to kind of see that we've made progress. What this act did was it mandated free and appropriate public education for all students, including those with disabilities, but the specific needs of students with autism weren't even addressed. So chipping away a little bit there. In the 1990s, right, we had the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And what that did was that basically reauthorized and expanded the EHA, emphasized transition services for students, and it required that transition planning start by 16. That was later amended to 14. And what we're going to learn in a little bit is that soon enough? We got to ask ourselves that. Is 14 soon enough? And those transition planning activities needed to be included in an individualized educational program. Autism awareness increased identification and support within schools, but transition planning was often, again, kind of generic and not specific.
Oh, folks, please mute if you can. Please mute. Whoever is doing that, please mute.
I want to say you got it.
Yeah.
Understanding, so the next part was in the 2000s. We had specialized transition programs. Schools and communities, they started to develop more specialized transition programs for students with autism, focusing on social skills, but also life skills. The rise of autism advocacy groups, that also led to greater awareness and resources for students and their families, really, as they were transitioning from high school into the communities or into college life. Programs started to include work-based learning experiences in the 2000s, and partnerships were there with local businesses. So you see the progress, right? The trajectory is there. There was also an emphasis on individualized support coming around 2010, around that decade. The importance of this personalized transition became more recognized. Schools began to implement these person-centered planning approaches. We hear that a lot in hospitals, don't we? Person-centered approaches. In this, it was moving into educational systems, and it involved the student. That's the first time we hear that. It involved the student and their family in the planning process. Also, of course, we've got technological advancements. We've got apps. We've got online learning that can be utilized or can be, augmented and supplemented. So just kind of understanding what has happened over the course of, say, the last 50 or so years. So contemporary practices, what do we have now? Transition planning now often starts pretty early, sometimes in middle school. And I will challenge you to ask yourself, is that soon enough? Hopefully, we get out in front of things to provide ample time to prepare for adulthood. We've got IEP teams, including special educators, transition specialists, which is a newer term, vocational rehab counselors, and family members. They work together to create comprehensive transition plans. Plans typically cover post-secondary education, as well as employment, independent living, and community participation. But as Fred and I were discussing before this, challenges definitely still remain. So before I go any further, I want to just identify who we're talking about here. Who are we talking about? As a clinician, when I started out, and anybody in the healthcare field, you know this, you want to change the world, and you want to impact change to everyone that you come in contact with. For me, as I started out, I would often find myself disappointed and frustrated because I was trying to make it best for everyone and get them to a place where everybody could do everything. You can't see me, but I'm about 6'3". And I'll never forget, in history class in 8th grade, Mr. Feller said, "Look at Jane. She'll never be able to be an airline stewardess because of her height." And I thought, you know what? He's right. And I shouldn't try to do that. What does that mean in relation to this? That means that there are certain
Hold
individuals.
on, just
There are
hold
certain,
on. I wanted to check something. Thought I sent it out. Okay, you got an email yesterday.
can you,
Somebody-
Yeah,
Oh,
what
gosh.
part? So what do
Uh,
you go ahead? What do you want to ask me now?
Deb, you've got to mute everybody else, please.
Or who? You have to read the chart. So come here.
Whoever is reading the chart, please mute yourself.
So if you get an incoming fax or
Oh.
incoming online,
Deb,
right? So where are you getting the request from? So it's really going to end up this
Carol
way.
Ann, we can hear you talking. Please stop.
So thank you, Fred. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I that helped me try to identify who are we talking about here specifically? Are we talking about a group of individuals? Can we help everyone? We can help everyone, but we can't necessarily transition everyone. And I just wanted to point this out because, as I said, as healthcare providers, I think we want to make sure that we have everybody in the best place that they can be, but we do need to define the specific population we're talking about. So in 2013, I listened to a presentation, and it was by Dr. Gary Stobbe, and he's a board-certified neurologist and director of the Adult Autism Clinic at the UW Medical Center out in Washington. He also directs adult transition services at Seattle Children's Autism Center. He spoke about the trajectories of children and individuals with autism. Before that point, so 2013, I didn't have a frame of reference for how to categorize the levels of needs with persons on the autism spectrum, more specifically students with autism. What he said really made a lot of sense to me, and I just wanted to share it with you because it helps me frame who we're talking about moving forward. He focused on understanding the importance of trajectories and the obstacles facing individuals transitioning into adulthood. In terms of outcomes, we know there's myriad ways to try to answer the questions. If you're a parent, what can I expect? How do I plan? What is beneficial and where do I find it? As a clinician, it was really important for me to think about who we're speaking about. So who is this? And he broke it down into 3 different categories. And he said, about 3.25% achieve optimal outcomes of all individuals, and this is kind of a broad stroke here, but you have about 3% of people achieve optimal outcomes, which is according to an article by Holt in 2008, meaning someone's identified with autism, but they're able to progress through life really without needing a lot of support. They get there on their own. They may have some quirkiness, they may have some areas of social needs, but they're able to provide for themselves and really become kind of, as we like to say, a functional member of society. 60% continue to require some type of support. And then there's 20% who remain severely impacted and are going to need 24/7 support. And that's according to Seltzer in 2004. So if you think of those 3 lines, those 3 trajectories, right? The 3% that are basically going to figure it out on their own, around the 20% that are going to be severely impacted, we're talking about that middle 60%. That's the biggest piece here. And for me, that helps me frame who I need to focus on and how I need to focus on that. So for the purposes of this talk, we need to think about those 60%. The National Autism Report states that 36 of young adults with autism attended post-secondary education within 2 years of leaving high school. With that, though, employment rates were low. Almost 60% have never worked. So there's a significant gap in the services and support that occurs during this transition period. This is based on the National Autism Indicators Report. So we see that there is a paucity of support there, and we need to figure out how to fill that. So another little brief review here, we're going to talk about some of the characteristics. We've all worked with people on the spectrum, and we recognize these different pieces of the pie, don't we? We know this. We know there's social and communication challenges that exist. We know all these things are here. Here's what's interesting. When an individual is diagnosed with autism, oftentimes parents kind of become the PhDs of their own kids. And that's something characteristic-wise that we really need to pull from as we move forward. Because we know that each student with autism is unique, and the impact of each of these pieces of the pie is going to vary. So we have to have that personalized approach when we talk about transition planning that looks at the strengths, the challenges, the interests of the individual, and we have to have collaborative efforts. So as we look at each of these characteristics, I'm going to provide you with some examples of the impact that these challenges have, but also some support strategies along with some real life examples of some individuals that I've worked with. And you're going to find out how these folks do toward the end of this talk, but I'm going to present you with their initial information as we move forward. Social and communication challenges, one of the pieces of the pie. The example I'm going to give is of a girl I worked with named Sarah. She was a young woman, is a young woman with autism. She really thrived in the structured environment of high school. She had access to social skills training there, and she had a supportive peer group. After graduation, though, that support fell off. She found it really difficult to make new friends. She felt challenged with maintaining social connections, and that lack of social network and opportunities to engage with peers, it resulted in severe isolation and loneliness, and it only really exacerbated her anxiety and depression. Another guy that I worked with named Alex. Alex, his challenge, again, social, but he had difficulty understanding social cues and boundaries to the point that he found himself in legal trouble right after high school. Without continued social skills training and guidance, he inadvertently violated personal space and social norms, and this led to misunderstandings and conflicts with others. He had several run-ins with the law, and that caused stress for Alex and his family. So these social and communication challenges, even though they may be mitigated in high school, there's a big cliff that a lot of times individuals fall off of. And some of the results can be, just as I've stated here for Sarah and Alex. Other areas, repetitive behaviors and restricted interests. Lisa was great at computer programming during high school, but she didn't get any post-secondary vocational training or mentorship. Without guidance, she really kind of stopped there. And as Fred and I were talking before I started talking today, that actualization of potential and that recognition that they may not be getting paid what they actually could be getting paid, Lisa, really struggled and missed out on potential career opportunities in a field where she had the potential to be amazing. She ended up in a series of low-paying jobs that didn't have anything to do with her interests or abilities, just to make ends meet. So again, very restricted interests, right? And that kind of translated into some challenges there. Sensory sensitivities. So Tom, he graduated from high school with a basic set of life skills, but he lacked really comprehensive training in independent living. His mom was great, but she had a hard time letting him do the things that he needed to do for himself. He didn't have any transition support. He moved back home, and he remained heavily dependent on his parents for daily tasks, like managing finances and cooking and navigating transportation, as well as ensuring his sensory sensitivities were managed. His parents, who were aging, they really became increasingly worried about his future independence and quality of life, but they didn't know what to do to help him any further. Emma. So Emma had the academic ability to attend college. So she's, if we think about that trajectory again, toward the high part of that 60%. But without guidance and support during that transition, she found that application process to college just terribly overwhelming. She did get enrolled. I remember specifically when she called me and said that I got in, I start in January, but then she struggled. She went to a large state school, large classes, didn't have any individualized support, and she dropped out after one semester. She just felt overwhelmingly stressed and lack of accommodations, and she just couldn't organize in a way that helped her manage her time. She didn't know how to create the strategies that she needed. So again, more missed career opportunities. Mike. So Mike had a lot of anxiety, and he experienced, even in high school, he required a lot of assistance to just function. He had access to a counselor in high school, and he had a really structured schedule. But after graduation, he lost those supports. And he struggled with the unstructured nature of being an adult. He really did. Without the necessary coping strategies, his anxiety escalated. He had multiple hospitalizations and severe depression. John, I always think about John with a smile. He graduated from high school with really good grades. He was like so upset. He was really close to salutatorian. But he didn't receive any transitions or support or job training tailored to his needs. So without assistance in developing his vocational skills or finding a suitable employment, he really struggled to secure a job. He had several failed attempts at entry-level positions. He became discouraged and ultimately stopped looking for work and became financially dependent on his family and kind of had that personal sense of failure. So these are all examples of things that have happened to individuals on the autism spectrum with whom I've worked. The things that we can do to provide support are very specific and unique to each person. So if we were to summarize the studies that we just looked at, the case studies, right? What do we need to focus on? So with Emma, the failure to pursue a higher education, John, underemployment or unemployment, and Lisa, right? Computers, missed opportunities for other skill development. So that academic and vocational preparation, those kinds of things, we need to develop these programs that teach appropriate social behaviors. We need to have peer mentoring programs, and we need to use what we have in high school and create situations to carry them forward. Same with Sarah. Social isolation, right? She just got really depressed and kind of turned into himself. Alex had difficulty with proxemics and social awareness and making sure that he kind of followed the rules, right? The mores, the social mores, needed something set up there for him like that. Tom, sensory issues, didn't have anything really set up. So when he got out into the kind of loose world of being an adult, all of his sensory issues and all of his challenges really ended up creating this dependence on his family. And then Mike just basically mentally just was not able to handle a lot of the things that life threw at him. So a little bit of summary, but you can see that these are the characteristics that we looked at in the pie. They're all there, and we know what they are. Managing them is something that we need to be able to do, not just in a structured environment, but in an unstructured environment. So this may seem like a dire kind of talk. It's actually not. It's actually not. There's been a lot of research done, summary of studies on high school students with autism transitioning out of high school. So we've got some good research out there. What I gave you were case study examples of real life patients, real life folks with whom I know, who I got to meet after high school and try to encourage them to move forward, right? And meet them where they are and provide the things that they needed. What I'm going to show you now is actually the research that supports a lot of what these students experienced and what they said they needed without maybe really saying it. One study is from the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders. And what did this look at? Well, it emphasized the importance of self-advocacy skills. So remember, Mike got really mental health issues. He had a lot of challenges there. Executive function, success in college. When students were targeted with support services like mentor programs, when they had one other person with them, they had better outcomes. If they had one person who understood that they were transitioning from high school into a work environment, one person who understood that they were moving into college, their success increased tremendously. One person. Project Search. A lot of you've probably heard about Project Search. This was a 9 to 12 month program, and it was started by actually Erin Reel and Susie Rojakowski out of Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Initially, it was a program started actually within the hospital to provide primary employment, to make sure that there was secure employment for people with disabilities. That was their objective. Now, Project Search has expanded to more than 260 sites in Canada, in Australia, in the United States. And that primary objective, it's a business-led internship program. The primary objective is to really get improved employment outcomes. look at the results. Participants had 70% employment rate just because they participated in this 9 to 12 month training program. The key take home here, the last study talked about one person mentoring, the hands-on experiential learning. So if we think back to someone with a lot of sensory issues, if they're in the environment and if the environment is adjusted to the point where they need it to be, they can do great things. That's the take-home message with this. Another study, Transition Planning Youth with Autism, it's a review. So if we look at a review of the literature on ASD and students with ASD, lack of resources, inconsistent services, and insufficient training for educators. That's what the summary of this literature says. Success stories highlighted early individualized transition planning. Effective transition plans incorporated the family and other agencies. So this one we could summarize by saying we really need to start early. So we've got mentors, we've got training hands-on, and now we've got collaborative interactions with communities and family involvement. The next study I want to talk about, longitudinal study, transition outcomes for students on the autism spectrum. Students with autism, this is kind of like not an aha moment here, often experience delayed transition compared to peers. Vocational training and support programs lead to higher job retention and satisfaction. Here's the key. Post-secondary success was linked to participation in transition programs and direct access to disability support services. So that cliff that I talked about before, where it kind of feels like people may fall off right after high school, participating in transition programs, whatever they are, Project Search, anything like that, establishing more transition programs, whether it's starting something new, having them take, one class somewhere, and also making sure that they still have access to support services is basically the key here. Impact of inclusive post-secondary education programs. So what is the impact of these programs? So post-secondary education programs where students with autism attended college classes. So this was inclusive, along with neurotypical peers, showed really promising results. So in the inclusive programs, guess what? Social gains, self-confidence, and academic achievement. Once they graduated, they had higher employment rates and they integrated better into the communities. One of the take-homes with this was that individuals who participated in these programs were identified and had self-expressed that they needed the support. Usually it was to the instructor, and often the instructor paired them with someone else. So that goes back to the theme of the first study, where if you have one person, how much that person can help support and make a difference. So some of the key themes across these studies, there are gaps in services. There's some systemic barriers that still exist. There's gaps, that cliff that I talked about, common challenges, individualized planning. Once they had it, that personalized transition, individual, that was a crucial piece as well. Starting early, starting transition planning early. The majority of these studies said high school, that can lead to better outcomes. Support services, access to disability services, job coaching and mentorship programs, significantly improved access, family involvement, and then obviously positive outcomes, programs like Project Search that are structured, support that experiential learning, that hands-on learning, allows for, as my grandma used to say, the rubber to meet the road, right? That's where we actually see what someone's able to do or not do. So, based on this, let's follow up with the stories that I just told you about. Sarah, one of the things we looked at, she felt isolated, she felt by herself, she felt odd. That was one of the words she used to describe herself. She began volunteering. That was one of the suggestions that I had. Sarah was, again, the high part of that 60%, but she just didn't feel like she fit in. She began volunteering at her church. And she actually founded an online support group, and that support group now has, I think I spoke with her last week, more than 1,200 members. So this online support group, she focuses on the things that are challenging for her. John lived with his family for 5 years. His mother found a vocational rehab program for him. There was one that actually came about. She had to drive him about 45 minutes, Monday through Friday, one way. But guess what? The vocational rehab program, he's now an online IT consultant. Julie was just kind of late to start, and Julie had some challenges. She tried several jobs. The last I spoke with Julie was about a year and a half ago, and she was actually working at a cat cafe. I don't know if you guys know what a cat cafe is, but it's a place, I guess, where you can go have coffee and pet cats. And she's happy, but is she functioning at the highest level? Probably not, but at least she's got something. And she says that she's going to go to beautician school. So those are some of the success stories, some of the three folks that I worked with, but you'll notice they're not all listed here, right? These are the folks who actually succeeded, but they succeeded to the point that they were supported. So let's understand a little bit about what support services need and what our next steps as clinicians, professionals, healthcare providers, and those who just want to see everybody actualize their potential have to be. We need educational supports, post-secondary education programs for students with autism, including specialized college support programs. One of the things that was pretty obvious throughout the examples that I gave, college is a big thing. Adulthood is a big thing. Students aren't prepared just by graduating. That doesn't prepare them. Employment supports like job coaching, supported employment, vocational training tailored to the individual's interests and strengths. Independent living supports, so training in daily living skills, but not just asking an individual to fill out or complete their checkbook. This is actually training live, right? The hands-on experience of financial management, but also utilizing community resources. Mike, one of the things that he's just started doing is he now goes to the library where they have training classes on ADLs. And that's one of the things that he enjoys doing because he's in a small group, but he's learning. He also actually goes to the Y a lot, the YMCA, and there he takes some exercise classes. So he's at least getting out. Vocationally, he's not quite there yet, but there are community resources that you may not think specifically fit, but they can still provide a lot of support. In addition, social and communication support. So that social skills training, therapy. I'm a speech pathologist. All the people that I just talked about, they still come for therapy. They come for social skills training. Peer mentoring programs. I always try to match people with somebody their age, their demographic, their vernacular, right? That helps improve social interactions and community integrations. One of the things that I do also is in the summer, I participate in a speech and language camp. And this is for students, not on the spectrum, but these are students who in middle school are receiving speech therapy throughout the school year. There's something called the summer slide. And anybody who's a parent is aware of this term. Just basically means that over the course of those 3 months, oftentimes skills regress. And this speech camp that we do provides a bridge in between when they stop going to school to when they start again. I think of that a lot when I think about autism spectrum and how high school ends, and then there's that cliff or that slide. What we want to do is we want to provide a camp, or we want to provide a support to ease that into when they get back into a structured, comfortable situation like they had in high school. So some of the challenges we've got, right? Many students still have difficulty with transitioning, and there's a gap. Ensuring that continuity of support is really where we come into play. Advocacy is a big thing, right? We need to make sure that individuals with autism are receiving the necessary support and resources to thrive. Just a little summary here. IEPs are working to tailor that transitional support. How early do we need to start? I mentioned that at the start of this talk. How early do we need to begin with individuals? In that 60%, oftentimes kids are able to say what they want to do or what they like or what they don't like. The sooner we get that self-involvement and that self-determination, that's going to help the student advocate for themselves and have a clearer path of what they need and what they need to ask for. That social integration and support, how do we do that? Like I said, lots of community involvement, peer mentoring, support groups. The independence and the ADLs, supported living arrangements are also out there. I did want to mention that. But the use of technology and apps for daily management is just a tremendous, tremendous support system for most people. And what I've found is I will get text messages and emails more often than I will get any kind of phone calls or any kind of direct communication. And so I think that that's an important success that we've been able to utilize in terms of technology. So from a mental health standpoint, I wanted to touch base on that. There's programs such as the Teach Autism program that stands for Treatment and Education of Autistic and Related Communication Handicapped Children. It's obviously something that was not necessarily begun in the United States, but the program provides a structured teaching approach and it tailors to the strengths and needs of individuals with autism. It has psychological assessments and individualized treatment plans. Autism Speaks is a wonderful resource, as is the Peers program. Autism Speaks offers a wide range of resources. It has toolkits. Mike is currently working through one of those toolkits and guides. That's how he found out about going to the Y and participating. Same with Julie. You know, she found that she really liked animals, so she wants to go in a place and she helps at the cat cafe. These all provide mental health service information as well. And then the Peers program, that stands for Program for the Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills. It's a social skills intervention program, and this starts with adolescents and young adults. It focuses on developing friendships and handling social interactions effectively. My daughter, who's 12, she's not on the spectrum, but she works with as kind of a peer model for a lot of kids her age in this program, and it's been quite successful, and she really enjoys it. Got good feedback from the folks she's worked with too. So I think we've got an aspiring healthcare provider there, maybe a social worker. But all of these things help in creating a supportive environment. So if we think about successful transition programs, what do they look at? We look at the specifics, school to work programs, jobs. We have to think college. We have to think college. And this is something that is an initiative that's actually been created, and it's dedicated to developing and expanding and improving higher education options for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's another option, right? Think College provides resources, research and technical assistance to colleges, universities, and families to help support this. So Think College begins with the student, but it also includes the college that the individual wants to go to. So all of these programs that help really focus on the interconnectedness of everything. And speaking of interconnectedness, we've got families and caregivers, right? Advocacy and support roles of families can't be understated. Resources for caregivers are out there, and collaborating with schools and service providers. Autism Speaks also has family services. It provides a wealth of resources like toolkits and guides for families. The National Autism Association offers programs aimed at safety, crisis prevention, and support for families. Alex have worked really hard to get he and his family utilizing this specific part of it. The Big Red Safety Box is something that they have, and it provides safety materials for families and various webinars and resources. So things we can do. And then the Autism Society of America obviously focuses on creating these networks. Local affiliates are there, and then family support groups, as well as parent training. There's also respite care services. So you probably are familiar with those. Allow some caregivers to rest or attend to each other's responsibilities. It can get overwhelming for the parents and the significant others. So it's important to know that there are things like that. There's also sibling support programs that are out there, and that provides siblings with the opportunity to connect with others, really, who have a sibling, because as we'd say, that's usually the secondary patient, right, the families. And then we have something called the Autism Navigator, online resources, community resources. So there's a lot out there. It's directing individuals to those things can really help. Policy and community support. Community and advocacy is a huge part of driving change and collaborating with schools and service providers. It starts, as they always say, in your own backyard. So if we're able to drive some policy changes, that can make a big impact on future. Speaking of the future, future directions. Emerging researches and innovative practices. So we've got the integration of technology, continued development of technology to support learning, communication, and independence. The use of simulated experiences helps to a point, but don't forget the first studies that we looked at that talked about the need for that hands-on live training. Policy and funding, so advocacy for policies that provide adequate funding and support for programs, making sure there's inclusive practices. From a research standpoint, ongoing research into effective transition practices and outcomes for students. We've just started, right? If we look at that, the timeline that I presented, really 2010 is when things really started to take off and become something that is independent, right? That is kind of person-driven. So we've only really just begun with that. So overall, while really significant strides have been made, ongoing efforts are still needed to address things. So I always like to think about, as I come to the close of this talk, I always like to think about positive things on the horizon, right? So let's imagine for a second. Imagine if someone is identified early, and imagine if the research that we have shows that there are certain career markers that this person would benefit from, because right now we have those case experiences. Instead of having one story, we could have 1,000 stories about someone who was specifically addressed and how that trajectory went, so that the next person who comes along, we can provide them support along that same line. From there, we can foster individualized based on some outcomes. So instead of just looking at one case, it will be nice to have a lot of cases that say, this is where this individual is based on his history. We've identified that these are the things a person with these types of characteristics, with these types of abilities, with these types of opportunities might need. I wanted to show you this real quickly. There are places that have definitely gotten it right. And I'm not going to show this to you from like a copyright standpoint, but it's called In a Different Key. I don't know if any of you have seen it. A mom went to interview this gentleman who's walking here. She tracked down the first person ever diagnosed with autism. And he's now an older guy. He lives in rural Mississippi. And what she found, right, was that if you look at this last sentence, more communities are learning to have the backs of people on the autism spectrum. It's a lovely, this is not a plug for this, but this shows what happens, because his mom initially thought he needed to be institutionalized because they had no idea what autism is at that time. And after about a year, she went and got him and said, you know what, no, I'm going to work with him, to the point that he became someone who worked at, I believe he worked at the bank, and he's traveled overseas by himself now. The community supports him. He's got a system in place there. You hear him talk and he says the same thing. He's very repetitive in his behaviors, but they got it right. This community accepted this individual and supported and brought him up. So that's something I just wanted to say, that that's out there. And that to me is the blue horizon that we can look toward. So final remarks, just kind of summarizing the studies that I talked about. Individualization, right? Having one person to help, making sure that we have collaborative efforts and support, and then just kind of moving forward with all the things that we have at our fingertips to recognize the needs of each individual. I'm going to open it up here for some questions, but not until I show the book that Fred edited there. And that's one of our books that's out there. Wrote a chapter in there on transition that speaks to a lot of the things that I talked about today. So I know I've gone 1 minute over and I apologize, but thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.
Thanks, Fred.
Great job. Wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Any questions from, I mean, I have a couple things I can say, but I don't want to preempt anybody else with questions or comments.
Hi, Fred. I raised my hand.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi, really, Jane, fantastic talk. My name is Lisa Nee. I put some things in the chat. You know, a transition has been a passion of mine since working with my son. And so I've given over a lot of time to trying to figure it out. I have been speaking to a lot of people, including the director of the special education services on the state level.
Sure.
And he will tell you the most important thing to the success of a transition is a passionate parent. And that's unfair. It's unfair. And that is why they will, you know, one, not all parents can do that. And two, then pay me to do it because I had to quit my job to have a successful transition for my son. And I think that just speaks to the low quality of transition services within the schools. And every child with an IEP has the transition bill of rights, and they are not and nobody is held accountable because it starts when they're 14 and then they move from high school to the 18 to 22-year-old services, and then they step off the cliff. And so at each stage, everybody says, well, I did my job, and then nobody is accountable for the outcome. So I wanted to just ask you, because I've created a survey that I would like to send out to students and parents and guardians, what we can do when we say start earlier to make those services more impactful.
I think you bring up, obviously, I mean, you've walked the walk, right? So you know exactly what it's like, and you know that words are just words.
Yeah.
And the actions behind those words are not where we need to be. And I think the big part of it is that advocacy piece. But I do think starting earlier, I think high school's too late. I think middle school's too late. I think a lot of times individuals can be identified very early on. I think of it like those of us who have put financial stuff away for our kids' future, we usually start that pretty early on. But again, Lisa, when we're talking about that, those are people who think like that. So whom we need to capture are not only those who think about planning early, but we need to capture and provide education to those who don't think about it. And I really think that starting earlier, I would say, you know, first, second grade is when we need to hit the ground running with this and have a comprehensive plan that not just stops at each chunked point in time, to your point, right? Like we did our IEP, we did our part. There needs to be some continuity in that whole transition piece. And I do see what you sent in there, and I'm happy to help you and touch base about your project. I'll send you an email after the talk. How's that sound? Good. Did we lose Lisa?
Thank you. Yes, I unmuted myself. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No, appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Somebody else has a hand up. Great, go for it.
Yeah, hi, Eric Nicholson. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist in Norwalk and in Connecticut here. And one of the problems I see is actually getting the students identified to begin with. And the schools, I mean, I'm lucky to get them identified with ASD before they graduate high school. And then the restricted interests, the lack of motivation, the inertia, the lack of parents understanding. Often parents have traits and they have executive functioning deficits for advocating for their kid. So, you know, just so much I can do in my practice. And I mean, I'm wondering if you have any pearls in terms of, like recently I had a patient not do well.
I actually do have something for you there, Eric. And by the way, I used to live in Greenwich and I worked at Stanford Hospital. So I kind of know the Norwalk area. Is that exit 5, exit 6? Anyway, we could talk. I think
16. That's
16.
okay.
Okay, further up. I guess I was thinking of something else. Bridgeport. I think personally, that individuals who can diagnose do not use ancillary services enough to push that envelope forward. I'm a great advocate. Speech pathologists, there's a bunch of us out there, and we can be a real pain. So can OTs and so can PTs. And I think if an individual isn't talking, right, they're going to come to speech therapy. We can push for that. So I believe that it's the healthcare professions that can really help each other a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, some of these patients, in all honesty, are, you know, have good expressive language, and maybe in the past it would have been diagnosed with Asperger's.
A school psychologist has difficulty getting a child diagnosed. I wish they'd send them to speech. I really do, because we've worked with this and we've pushed. So, I mean, we can do this, right? It's in our scope of practice to say, this is what we're seeing. This is what we need.
But Jane, in
Yeah.
all honesty, not speech and language pathologists are created equal. And I had a patient who was failing at a boarding school because of poor social communication, pragmatics, like,
Yeah.
reading the room. And I thought the speech and language pathologist would be perfect. And I referred her to one locally. And that person thought she was doing fine because the way she interacted with her. The way a 17-year-old interacts with a 60-year-old speech pathologist is not at all obviously indicative of how she interacts with her peers. So I do have trouble finding, I've been in practice going on 25 years. I trained with Fred back in 2001 at Yale. And I still find, people in most ancillary services just not believing me, because I treat mostly OCD in my practice, and most of my OCD patients are on the spectrum.
Mhm.
And, they're lacking social motivation. They have social anxiety, of course. Not of course, but the OCD contributes to that as well as their autism.
Yeah.
They've had PTSD from being bullied, and, lack of social interaction, motivation, restricted interest. It's so obvious to me when I meet these individuals that they've never been recognized. And then schools, think they're helping the students when they drop executive functioning supports because they have to be in the real world after they graduate.
Right.
So Westport fails miserably. Stanford has failed miserably for my patients. Greenwich has failed miserably. Norwalk is a given, because the population's not as wealthy and they tend not to advocate very well. So I've been perpetually frustrated by getting the kids identified, and then of course with transition planning, which is meager. And when you mentioned Project Search, I looked, and one of my patients isn't doing well at a local community college. Apparently there's a Project Search ability something on that campus,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
the
I
school
think
didn't
that,
even,
yeah,
so-
I hear you, Eric. And I won't apologize for everyone in my profession. I will say there are people who specialize a bit more in certain areas and are passionate about different things. So I'm sorry that happened, but there are, I just feel like there needs to be more, all of us coming together to that would be the only nugget I have. I don't have a magic wand, but that would be
Yeah.
my suggestion. So I apologize. Feel free to email me.
Oh.
I mean, I can help you with folks in the area. I
I
think we've
could
got
just-
go
If I
ahead.
could
Fred.
just throw in there, Jane, this has been a great talk, and it's a great point, Eric. One of the other things I've just had the experience of a quote unquote cured case, a child who's one of my colleague Debbie Fine's optimal outcome. Everybody says, "Oh, it's wonderful, they're cured, they're cured." Well, the kid started junior college. The father called to tell me he flunked out, and I said, "Why did he flunk out?" He never went to classes.
Yeah.
right, exactly.
How did that happen?
Right. How did
Well, we just left the house every day, and we assumed he was going to class. No, he went down to the library and played video games.
Yeah.
You're thinking, oh my God. Well, maybe he's quote unquote optimal outcome, but that ain't so optimal. And we also sometimes, I think, do a disservice to sort of saying, oh, isn't this wonderful? Because kids do make progress, and that's great. That's the good news. But then we pull literally all of the supports out from under them, and they go kaboom.
I think that's a huge part of it too. And I know, is it Lucia and also Jessica have a couple comments here. I'm sorry if I killed your name, Lucia, but I just wanted to add to that too, Fred. I think it's never done.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt that, remember when Jeremy Renner, remember that whole story when he got, I like to make associations in my head. So remember Jeremy Renner, the actor, and he, like the snowplow ran over him.
Yeah.
He was talking to the physical therapist, and the physical therapist said to him, because he said, well, when am I going to get discharged? And the PT said, never. Now, when has anybody ever said that to somebody on the autism spectrum or somebody? When is this done? It's not done. There's no done.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing, this isn't ever. And I just think that's the thing, right? It's never done. It's not. And if we think it is, then shame on us. So I didn't know, Jessica, did you want to say anything to your comment? I see your comment. I don't know if you're available to talk, but maybe she signed out.
No, I'm here. Go with Lucia first. Her hand.
Oh,
was
okay.
raised.
Okay. Yes, Miss Lucia. Oop, I can't hear you. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can anybody hear her?
You may be muted.
Oh, I think she unmuted. Maybe volume's down. Oh, shoot, we can't hear you.
Well, then go
Okay.
with the other person.
Yeah, Jessica, did you want to talk real quick? 'Cause
Yeah, I put a comment in the chat, sometimes I get very uncomfortable when I hear about, global statements about who's not doing what, or I do know that my district is very passionate about the transition process and executive functioning. I think, it could be people specific, case specific, but I hate the global assumption that maybe the ball is being dropped. But as a defense, it put me in a defensive position because I am very passionate about helping kids have the tools. I am very upset about the lack of resources post-graduation because we work really hard to get them there. But I
And
just wanted to make the statement that not everywhere is dropping the ball.
And it's hard too, Jessica, because it's not easy to find. Like Eric looked up now and he sees project searches there. Why don't we all know? You know what I mean? Like, it's not that people aren't doing it. It's just how loud do we have to be? We feel like we're saying it off the top of the mountain and tired of hearing ourselves say it, but yet it's still not getting there. How frustrating is that? So I feel I get what you're saying. Yeah.
But also this one patient, unfortunately, I'm trying to maintain confidentiality, went through an emergency room because of a bad outcome. And on the project search PDF, there's actually ability something at that hospital. And the ER doctors, the crisis team that called me, I explained that this individual is on the spectrum and what contributed to their needing an emergency evaluation. And they didn't volunteer that there are even people on site in the in that same hospital. So I don't know how siloed this is, like, and I mean, I try to know as much as I can to help my patients. I'm a fee-for-service practice, solo practitioner. And I really try to behave like a social worker when I need to and job coach when I have to. And I'll do everything I can to help my patients. But, other people just aren't really, advocating or aware. So
Yeah.
it's different.
The
There's
siloed nature of our practices is another issue that sadly really contributes to this. And the way that the law works is also, it's like the magic age, and then kaboom, you're off and it's a different law and a different thing. I realize we're at an hour and I know some people have to leave. People are welcome to stay on if Jane's got the time. Jane, this was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing more about these cases, and I hope you can get it together for publication. It was great.
Oh, thanks, Fred. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And your email is in the chat, or how do I email you? Sorry.
I will send it to you directly. Eric, how's that?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Make sure I can get it before you log out.
No logging. Super. And Lisa, I'll be reaching out to you. Lycia, I'm going to send you my email too, girl, because I know you're not able to get on for some reason. So, but Fred, thanks as ever for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.